It's my fundamental philosophy that the universe is essentially a game. But we use the word game or we use the word play in varying senses, and it may give the wrong impression because very often people assume that when such a word is used, it indicates something trivial. As we say, it's only in play or only a game. And then when you consider what an appalling amount of suffering the universe contains, one wants to feel that it's worthwhile. You see, either you must take the point of view that if there is this deplorable suffering, the universe is one hell of a mess, and the only response that you can make to it is to do battle. Or you may say, no, it isn't really a mess. Somehow all this suffering amounts to something in the end. It creates energies. It's a kind of a process like an oyster suffering to mature a pearl. People who feel bothered about that can't quite emotionally contain the idea that it's all a game. In my view of the world, which is semi-Buddhist, semi-Hindu, the creator and the creature are one, and all beings whatsoever are the masks and plays and ploys of the central self. There is just this self, which plays itself through all forms, through all of us, endlessly. Let's go back to the fundamental assumption that all people, and this also includes all beings whatsoever, all people are manifestations, disguises of the total reality behind this cosmos. And that if that is so, there are not any mistakes in the world. When you look at patterns on the foam of the breaking waves on the seashore, and you look at the outlines of mountains, and the grain in wood, and the markings on marble, you notice that it never makes an aesthetic mistake. Never. Also, when you study plants and you go into their relationships with each other and with insects, the fact that the so-called diseases of plants are the full life of some other kind of organism having evolved. And you see this complexly interrelated world, and you realize that it all hangs together. That everything outside the human world is a system of balances where you couldn't have really any form of life without the others going on too. There have to be friends and there have to be enemies. Because if there aren't enemies, the friends get too prosperous and they kill themselves by their excessive exuberance. Conflict at one level is health at another. Just as conflict going on between microorganisms in your bloodstream is absolutely essential to the health of your organism as a whole. You're not aware of that conflict going on because conscious attention doesn't need ordinarily to focus upon it. And so you don't get involved and you're not anxious about what party is winning and what party is losing. They're keeping up a kind of balance. Now then, to take this a step further, we are all amazingly involved in the process of being human and playing our game and taking our side. And therefore our victories and defeats, our sicknesses and our healths are things we get mighty partisan about. And therefore we cannot see that human behavior is just like everything else. It never makes a mistake. Only its never making a mistake must include the feeling that mistakes can be made. When these creatures that are not self-conscious behave, they behave spontaneously. They just go zoom, zowie, and do what they have to do. And so if it doesn't work, they die. But they don't worry about it in advance. That's that. Magnificent, you see. And human beings have a faint memory, kind of archaic, collective unconscious, Jungian style feeling that there was a time when we didn't have to worry. And when we could never be neurotic. A great deal of religion, you see, is an attempt to regain the golden age, the paradise lost. And so it involves, as it were, an attitude of surrender. Be not anxious for the morrow, what you shall eat, what you shall drink, or what clothes you will wear. Or consider the flowers of the field. They don't work, they don't spin, they don't gather into barns. And yet Solomon, in all his splendor, was not clothed like one of those. And so if God clothes the grass of the field, which exists today and is thrown tomorrow into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, faithless ones? For all practical purposes, that's ridiculous. You can't live that way. After all, you've got to plan for your old age. You've got to have a savings account. You've got to have insurance. You've got to have a job. You've got to do all those things. See? So you have to think about that. Why can't I do that? So you see, in this way, the human being comes to reflect upon himself and begins to see that there's something wrong. Now, there isn't. But it's right that he should feel that something is wrong, because it is through this that his capacity for self-knowledge and self-consciousness develops. So you see, there is the sense that somehow or other at some time there was a fall, a point at which we became unnatural. There's a great deal of worry going on about this now because of the rise of the computer. You know this? This is terribly interesting. That a new form of intelligence, you see, has come into the world, which is in certain directions vastly superior to human intelligence. Now, all this machinery that we are making is an extension of our brain and is a new kind of life. But it worries us. And when we start to do that, we get the feeling something is going wrong. There has been a fall. There has been a mistake. And exactly the same sensation, you see, is anciently connected with the development of self-consciousness in the cortex. Something went wrong. Because every time we get that feeling, it means that we've taken a new step in controlling things. Here it is. Now, when you haven't yet discovered that the new development, such as self-consciousness, is really a new form of nature, like a branch coming out of a tree, which is a kind of a new development of the trunk. And it's something just as healthy and just as splendid as that. Then you begin to reproach yourself. You begin to be alienated, you see, from your own center. But do you understand that being alienated from your own center is a form of, a way of stepping apart so that you can see yourself? So this self-consciousness is a kind of resonance. But then you see, when it gets to the point of this terrible feeling, I can't trust my instincts anymore. I've got to decide. Well, that's a terrible thing to do, because you can't be genuine anymore. See? You know that when you love somebody, you also want to get as much out of them as you can. You know what most people think of as spirituality? Something totally abstract, something mathematical, something electronic, something has no kind of pus or blood or goo, especially no flesh in it. See? That's the spiritual state. So that expresses the feeling of these people fundamentally, who are at variance with their essential life. If the game of the cosmos is of the fundamental pattern of hide and seek, then when hide turns up, and it's the time for hide to happen, then darkness has its day. Hide in the dark. But when it's time for seek, then light has its day. And we find out what was hidden in the dark, and the right hand suddenly discovers what the left hand is doing. At first it's shocked. What, that? So to discover that you are a phony through and through and through is to discover that you're a big act, that you're a game. And when you discover that, then you wake up to find out who's the player. ordinary mortals, with all your desires and all your vulgars, are deluded. You get attached. But there are a certain minority of us who are above it all. You ordinary mortal. With all your desires and all your vulgars, are deluded. You get attached. But there are a certain minority of us who are above it all.
Well, now, really, when we go back then to falling in love and say it's crazy, falling. You see, we don't say rising into love. There is in it the idea of the fall. And goes back, as a matter of fact, to extremely fundamental things. there is always a curious tie at some point between the fall and the creation.
They both see the traps. No fool, oh, they won't go back. No fool, oh, they've got a mind track. No fool, oh, it's all a mystery. Let it come and let it be. Let it come and let it be. Let it come and let it be. Let it come and let it be.
Taking this ghastly risk is the condition of their being life. You see, for all, the life is an act of faith and an act of gamble. The moment you take a step, you do so on an act of faith because you don't really know that the floor is not going to give under your feet. The moment you take a journey, what an act of faith. The moment you enter into any kind of human undertaking and relationship, what an act of faith. See, you've given yourself up. But this is the most powerful thing that can be done. Surrender. See, and love is an act of surrender to another person. Surrender to another person.
space is used in basic Indian philosophy, in Vedanta. It is called Akasha. And Akasha is for them the fundamental element. There are 5 elements: earth, water, air, and fire, and Akasha. And so space contains all the other elements. In Buddhist philosophy, where the ultimate reality is called Shunyata, the void, the Chinese will translate the Sanskrit Shunyata with their character that means sky or space.